Good morning. Welcome to 1426 of the H series. We're having sunshine here in Gothenburg. It is just lovely. We are approaching high temperatures too. Yesterday I was even sweating, about 10. Spring will now come swiftly. This is a continuation of a fantastic book by Terry MARKS-TARLOW, A Fractal Epistemology for a Scientific Psychology. And in the last two lectures we, so to speak, went through the basics of what fractality is. We spoke about the Mandelbrot set, the Koch curve, Koch snowflake, and we had a look into a newer and more scientific understanding of knowledge and learning that doesn't take in concordance an absolute separation between subject and object. In fractality, it is more of a harmonious dance. Where all sides are participating. And often there is different borders between subject and object, if there even are borders sometimes. It's a participating dance of presencing, of becoming. Fractality could be construed as one of the answers to the Seinsfrage of Heidegger. The why question cannot be answered even, I would say, within the standard subject in front of object in space. I will continue on page 22. And we just went through the fractal paradoxes. This is a continuation. That the subject is obviously in some ways the measuring rod. What measures is the subject? A variety of homo mensura, actually, but more specific. So we spoke about the ruler. Notice when the ruler is 6 inches long, it is too crude to capture any detail of the Koch curve. When the ruler is 2 inches long, it is short enough to capture more detail. And the length measured extends to 8 inches. As the ruler shrinks to 1/2 an inch, the measurement captures yet more detail and extends to 12 inches. Two important additional observations. One, even at 1/2 an inch long, the measuring stick still does not capture all the detail of the Koch curve. 2. Generally, the shorter the measuring stick, the longer the measurement. Such that at the mathematical limit of an infinitely small measuring stick, we obtain an infinitely long measurement. Hence, this supports Mandelbrot's claim regarding the infinite length of any section of the coastline. In both the Koch curve example and the Mandelbrot set, we see how infinity quite literally exists at the edges of fractal objects. This is very important, very pertinent. In both the Koch curve example and Mandelbrot set, we see how infinity quite literally exists at the edges of fractal objects. And that goes for all objects, like words and thoughts. Especially pertinent when it comes to thoughts. Making thoughts one-dimensional or two-dimensional is this tendency against abstraction and intellectualization. This helps us to grasp how fractals can model irresolvably seeming subjective boundaries. To get a fuller feel for fractal boundaries, such as I claim represent the psychological edges of the self, consider figure 112, which illustrates Newton's method of approximation. Each shaded area converges towards one of four correct solutions to the simple equation x to the Thor minus 1 equals 0. Each shaded area are the x's, and each solution consists of a black circle within the center of each of four quadrants. More technically known as basins of attraction. Whereas each solution is finite, the boundary zone separating the four basins of attraction is infinitely deep. What is more, this mathematical rendering also reveals the infinite interpenetration between the parts and the whole. This is most pertinent. There is an interpenetration in fractality between parts and whole. This is because each of the fractal boundary zones contains all of the other basins recursively an infinite number of times. The notion of interpenetrating boundaries, such as exists interpersonally, that is, between one person and another, is a subject of great interest to me as a clinical psychologist. I have written about the relational unconscious as shared by therapist and patient beneath the level of conscious awareness. For example, in Psyche's Wheel, I cite the case of a patient who one day brought into our session my own childhood dream. This tidal wave dream was very different from anything she had ever remembered dreaming. As most of my patients' dreams involve scary chases and attacks, especially given the flood of change that happened next, both of us experience this dream as an unconscious bid to break the enactment stalemate of our psychotherapy for several months. The notions of fuzzy, interpenetrating boundaries between self and other, mind and brain and body, is consistent with the work of Scott Kelso. Kelso, a nonlinear researcher, also interested in how science and philosophy intermingle, has studied and written extensively about coordination dynamics. That is how patterns of coordination form, dissolve, adapt, and change through processes of self-organization. When examining implications of coordination dynamics for the brain-mind and brain-behavior barriers, Kelso uses the tilde to symbolize the dynamic nature of complementary paths, whose polar ends are not only of significance, but everything in between. Do remember here in this context that polarity and complementarity go hand in hand. Previously I have expounded that neurons and muscles are complementary pairs. They are also polarities. A fractally functioning thought or a piece of reasoning must contain polarities to have working capacity in movement. And I would like to add to the quote of John Archibald Wheeler: no one will be considered literate. I would take away the scientifically. No one will be considered literate tomorrow who is not familiar with fractals. Kelso has also studied how dynamical patterns of muscular motion existing within one person extends to others, such as when people fall into lockstep, or when musicians coordinate so precisely as to anticipate others' next moves. Kelso's recent work on hyperscanning extends these examinations even further. Hyperscanning involves the simultaneous brain scanning of two individuals as they interact in real time. This fascinating line of contemporary neuro research reveals very little difference between intrapersonal and interpersonal communication. In other words, how messages are sent from one part of the brain to another share similar coordination dynamics to how messages are sent between brains. Such research points towards fluid, dynamic boundaries between self and other. Inner and outer realms. Figure 112 provides a visual representation of fluid boundaries between inner and outer realms in the case of mathematical intuition. Subjective guesses at objective answers. And I have to say here, this is very close to Bayesian statistics. The guesses that are unfounded, which still give objective answers. I think that is a very good example of breaking the objective-subjective barrier in epistemology and the endeavor to get knowledge. To solve the equation, this is pertinent, x up to 4 minus 1 equals 0. Begin with a random guess at the solution. Then calculate the formula using your guess as the starting point. How close your guess is to one of 4 actual solutions determines what will happen next. the closer your beginning guess is to an actual solution, the quicker you arrive at the solution. If your initial guess diverges too far, it will land within the chaotic boundary zone between solutions. From which there is no exit. This visualization is particularly interesting given paranormal intuition as an important subject of interest within the field of transpersonal psychology. I have also used the diagram to model the chaotic boundaries that so often surround people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, also known as BDP. As a clinician who works often with people suffering from this diagnosis, I can attest to the frequent feeling of loose boundaries that trigger my fall into dangerous double-bind territory. From which there is no escape. I am damned if I do, and damned if I don't. From the perspective of the other, and utterly helpless to assert my own independent perspective. Finally, I suggest another excellent use of figure 112 for reconceiving Ken Wilber's integral grid. to add fractal boundaries in place of straight lines between his four quadrants increases the power of his model for understanding interpenetrating, subjective, intersubjective, objective and interobjective realms. And I would say figure 112 is a key to understand an intersubjectivity. I would say it would be impossible to understand this feature without that very important feature. My colleague Kalle very slowly can bring the slowly. It will be available on the net. I would recommend that you actually print it out. Power laws, a new kind of statistics. As mentioned earlier, most applied sciences depend upon mathematics to supply the necessary rigor for their foundations. Hard sciences such as physics frequently rest upon predictions supplied by pure mathematical formulas. For example, Einstein needed to delve into the strange, non-linear world of non-Euclidean mathematics to prove his theories of relativity. Softer sciences, such as biology or economics, often use statistical methods to test between competing hypotheses. Across all subfields of psychology and other social sciences. Normative statistics are traditionally used. this type of statistics, sometimes called a bell curve. Seeks the central tendency, that is the mean or norm of a population or sample. Unfortunately, normative statistics contain underlying assumptions that often prove to be false within most complex systems, as is described in detail in West's 2016 book on the topic. One underlying assumption that frequently proves false is the requirement that all underlying variables operate independently or orthogonally from one another. Pause there. So hello and welcome to the continuation of 1426. I will now show the Newtonian guesses, and this is an excellent model for depicting what intersubjectivity is and the interpenetration. And as you see here, there are 4 basins of attractors, and they correspond to different guesses. So depending what random number you are guessing, you will either come closer to, let's call it the truth, or further from. And this will always form in those cases. It is very close to Bayesian statistics, where eloquent guesses without, so to speak, foundation in material reality or the past are doing an excellent job in predicting and actually be specific. So in short, we are going from something that is usually perceived as completely subjective, are random guesses without any thinking before, so to speak. Our random guesses are represented here by pure subjectivity, but that pure subjectivity leads to objective results. And I would say this is the very best model for depicting intersubjectivity. It is great, and oddly enough, it's coming from Newton. And things seem to be happening here in the borderland of outside and inside. Not spot on, but on the border, the frontier. And I think it's easier here to see that you need both the absolute guesses, and you will also need the absolute truth. And presencing, or what is important, is coming in the middle ground those barriers you see here, those are the most important. So actually, complete objective truth as claimed by Newton is not even a good thing here. It is the middle ground that is important. Rather tough nut to crack, and I recommend you need to study the depiction. It's very, very good. It's in the link, it will be in the description, but it's absolutely crucial to have a look at it. Maybe a comment from my dear colleague Kalle here. I can hold this and I can help you with the microphone.
No, I will only ask, can you please explain the Koch measurement? Why is it in layman terms? So how does it enter this? Is it a very detailed, small analysis measurement that you do with Koch, or what is the point?
Okay, slowly. The Koch curve is to do with measurement going to finer and finer detail. There is a parallel here. Very good, actually, Kalle. Thank you. And the parallel is you can compare measurement in the Koch curve as the subject doing the measurement, and you can say that you randomly choose a measuring rod without thinking. This is the complete random guesses, a random measuring stick. Here you give the number. There is nothing out there to be previously true. You give the number, it is random, but you get a true objective value. And this, I would say, goes against the very core of how we perceive things to be. If we give a random number, at best, so to speak, we can be lucky and make a precise guess. No, here it is that the choice, the pure choice of a number, this example, or if we transfer the problem to the Koch curve, the random choice of a measuring rod gives objective results, which it does actually. If you have a measuring rod of, let's say, 10 inches, and you decide to measure the coast of Norway, the result will be objective. Everyone can claim to it. In this case, it is similar. Your random guess will enter into objectivity. And this is the glorious connection between your subjective choices, the observer position, and what is being observed are communally creating what is valuable. So this is the subject interpenetrating into reality, being there, constantly doing things. Did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Well, I put a pause there and I continue. So as you can see, with the Newtonian fractal statistics, that the subject's guesses, what we usually perceive to be of low value, not having decisive power, does make a very big difference. Indeed, it's crucial for the outcome. And it does yield objective, valuable results. I think this is one of the best illustrations to come over, or rather understand this. Decisive divide between subject and object. Otherwise, you sort of would be stuck in exclusiveness or stuck in exclusion. This is definitely a more healthy way of approaching the problem. And we're not bypassing the problem either. We are going directly into the problem. I think these sort of understandings can help ease up the disjunction between the left hemisphere with its representative mood and the right hemisphere with its more inclusive, exterior related and interior related, wider take. It is not extraordinarily difficult to see how they here go hand in hand. Helping each other, reinforcing each other. So to speak, the guesses, our imagination, if you like, of the imaginary particles that we mentioned from Alan Dembreen earlier on, the quantum physicist. They're interpenetrating into the objective side. It is not sealed off. There is a hole, and here I particularly like the Klein bottle, where the hole gives a more open containment. Not the strict, dividing, isolated containment, but an openness. You can also call this a sort of an osmosis in the border. Where things can seep through our guesses, going through the osmosis, going through the borders via osmosis. Or why not tunneling? The gift from quantum mechanics, showing that interpenetration between two disjunct areas is a fact. Something that can and does happen. This is also close to entanglement. Where two things are apart, but they are still intermingled. one particle could be at one reach of the universe and the other one at the absolute opposite position in the universe. And still they are twins, the same. Apart and still the same. Now it will become easier to be inclusive, to see the two sides being able to be different, opposing, in dialectical relationship, because they are same. These are things we usually cannot handle other than making everything completely separate. We will sort of always end up with a mind-body problem that is unresolvable. And although Terry MARKS-TARLOW makes a disclaimer in her book that she doesn't solve the mind-body problem. Or the hard problem, as it was named by the Australian philosopher David Chalmers. This is pretty close to it. It is another Klein bottle, and the attractor basins are showing a smooth movement from absolute non-fitting gases to more fitting and more fitting. It is not an absolute scale with zeros and ones. I would say the scale is in itself fractal. I think this is a good helping tool for understanding the observer position in the new physics. How our thinking, our dreams, our understanding and wishes does not preclude objective truth. Instead, it is from where objective truth is stemming. most possibly this is the guiding image and understanding that can help heal the ongoing war between wholeness and fragmentation. Where the specific seem to exclude the general, and the general seem to exclude the specific. In Paul Feyerabend's seminal book, The Conquest of Abundance, he shows that the monetizing of the world led to the eradication of all individuality, all differences, all uniqueness. And he meant that it is this uniqueness, this oneness, that also builds up true generalities, true universal understandings. Terry MARKS-TARLOW's exposure of fractality has helped me to an understanding how my imagination and my wishes, yearnings, are deeply interconnected into the objective, and an integral part it is not just an absence in the regular disjunct sense. It's a constitutive absence, to use a phrase from Terence Deacon. The absence of my subjective take on reality is a definite part of the wholeness. Just like the absence in a cylinder in a car is crucial for the piston to do its work, it's an integral part. A constitutive contribution, or rather a sine qua non for existence. This is presencing. Existence and disjunct observer is the lower way of understand. Where we are not actively guessing, wanting, feeling, sensing, or hypothesizing. I think we modern men get caught up in this, striving to be objective in our thinking. That's very close as the case for the hounds of a greyhound race, permanently unable to catch a hare that's running in front of them. It will always be out of bound. They will never ever be able to put their teeth in it. Deep down in the Newtonian paradigm, there are paradoxes that we ignore. If the reality is out there, a world at large, there will be a time difference constantly between the outside world and what I perceive. That will make myself constantly out of sync. I will always be a little too late in my perception. The distance is also a problem. I'm permanently apart from the things I experience. that distance takes away the Merleau-Pontian dimensionality. The depth disappears. There is no longer an intimacy between what I experience and the experiences, the experiencer. They are disjunct. In isolation. Here clearly Terry MARKS-TARLOW shows that interpenetration is constantly going on, and also for there to be a separate subject there must also be absolute sameness, entanglement if you like. So in the end, they are not absolutely disjunct. Separatedness and inclusion at the very same time. That is the whole in wholeness. It's the absence, it's the horror vacui that makes everything whole. And make it real. Realness can only be if there is intimacy. Remember the patients in the examples of Ian McGilchrist who suffer from stroke in the right hemisphere, and how their world lacks depth. Solely consisting of sheets of two-dimensional squared space collected on top of each other to make up a constructed representation of space. This a neologism of Ian McGilchrist, is very important. Let me put it on the board. This is a depiction of how the left hemisphere represents space. It doesn't know depth, so it takes a square and pile them up, and to make the representation of space, having no real access to it. And of course this is a joke of space or depth. We can also put squares on the different sides to represent a cube instead of directly perceiving it as is normal. In this case there will be a small time lag, which is always the case with the left hemisphere. It takes time to represent. Very good. Neologism. Represent. So what was presented or presencing, reality, as can only be understood by the right hemisphere or perceived by the right hemisphere, it perceives it, sends it to the left hemisphere, which represents it. It's an indirect procedure, so to speak. It does not directly enters into reality, but it is a bystander to reality and the happenings in reality. It's an indirect way of being in the world. Neither does the left hemisphere sense time. Time for the left hemisphere and also for the disjunct subject are disparate, distinct movements, picoseconds or femtoseconds if you like. That have no connection whatsoever. So movement is for a person with the right hemisphere lesion or stroke very hard to cope with. It is very Parmenidian or like the paradox of Zeno. Nothing really moves. And as there can be no movement, neither can there be movements. So a moment is represented by a person with right hemisphere deficit as consisting of smaller parts, picoseconds, nanoseconds, microseconds. An hour is 60 minutes, not a true hour. It, in the same way as I showed with space, represent it. And there are two reasons for that. First, this is the function of the left hemisphere. This is what it is supposed to do, and the only thing that it can do. The second is it does not have access to exogenous knowledge. It gets all its input from the right hemisphere. I think it could be very helpful to bring in Ian McGilchrist into Terry MARKS-TARLOW, Lee Smolin, Heidegger. It helps to understand this in some, I think, in a stressed situation, you can't really tell the difference. When we are busy, we always go into the left hemisphere mode. This is the fight and flight response when we are in a queue, or we're rushing, or we're thinking about the goals we want to achieve now already. That mode has become incredibly common. And I would say that is the modus, the Stimmung, the attitude, almost always for modern people. And therefore representations are the standard models. Attention has become a waste product. We do not preserve attention, the broader, more valuable, enriching attention. I would say we waste it within the few first hours of the day. Greed for too quick of a satisfaction takes us there. But if we can pause, we can get into the proprioceptivity, as David Bohm called it, the proprioceptivity of our own thinking, reflect upon it, having a true consciousness, not just a representation of it. This is something that Richard E. Lind pointed out, that the reflective consciousness, as he calls it, I would call it the automated unconscious observer, but it does its things automatically, and the self in the representation is a, so to speak, a stick figure drawing in the mid of reality, seeing things, having a distance. There's a very strict disjunction between the strict straw figure and the opaque, non-translucent things that he wants to own. The right hemisphere is the mode of reflection, of looking at one's thinking. I think most people of today don't even know that they have the right hemisphere mode to go into, because there is no time for the true self to reflect, to see what's happening. This inward blindness, not being able to see one's own thinking, makes the proprioceptive project of David Bohm impossible, because you don't even know where to start. I think that that was the mistake that was made within the Catholic Church in the Second Concilium in the 60s. They thought that liturgy, tradition, ceremony, hymns, psalms were contradictory and took the time and space for spiritual sensing. Being already Newtonianly inclined, the Concilium decided it was either or. that you couldn't do a hymn and at the same time be thinking about deeper things or be spiritual. That exclusion led to a disaster. But it is a very good example of the representational thinking of the then Concilium of the Vatican. And it's pretty easy to understand, even more so some 60 years later. How can you be spiritually inclined when you are busy, stressed out by hymns? Well, in the left hemisphere, that is actually true. The stressed out thinking that tries to catch the hare, the metaphor is still working here, will be even more stressed out if it has to perform hymns, sing psalms, do rituals. The complete lack of space will be even more lacking. It will be worsening the scenario, like giving salted water to a thirsty man. It takes time. It possibly takes years to go into the right hemisphere mode and sort of making the left hemisphere listen in. Being perceptive once more. So rather elongated summary here. I think I have a look-see at the time here, and it looks like it's time to say goodbye. I really went into the right hemisphere mode while talking today. It was great having you. Thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. I hope it's sunny where you are. Bye bye.